back on the BMW restoration. Now in this video we're going to tackle all of the major rust repairs, all the fabrication and welding, and this is one of the more time consuming parts of the job, but I hope you enjoy the process. Completely faded from black to nearly white in places. Not in that, the whole backing is completely deteriorated. That's very important, particularly with these BMWs when you're welding, is have a blower or some sort of device to put out the fire, because it will go on fire. Inside all the holes, it's full of cavity wax, and once that begins to heat up, it catches fire very easily. I've seen one too many cars go on fire from welding. So here we have the rear trailing arm reinforcement from KBR. I've just ground the backside back to bare metal and used the U-POL weld-through primer. This will leave a coat of zinc on the metal after it's been welded. It sort of holds up to the welding process and will prevent it from rusting. And I've done the same on the mounting itself, using argon and CO2 gas, and I'm running at about 10 litres per minute. First reinforcement plate welded in, of all ground flush. Not too worried about how it looks really. It's going to be covered in a good coat of under seal and epoxy primer, and I've just rounded the edges. That'll help prevent any paint adhesion issues and rusting on sharp edges. Obviously it's going to take quite a while to finish the rest of the welding, so we don't want to leave this sitting in bare metal because it will begin to flash rust. In the meantime, we're going to use the GENOLITE rust converter. That'll just again help any little bits of pitting that are left, convert them, and then when the time is ready we can just give it a quick sand and epoxy the complete underneath. That's the two rear mounts done, two middle mounts done, and now we're just going to go on to the last pocket. So it's ground back and zinc primed, and we're just going to get that welded in. So now I'm going to move on to reinforcing the rear shock mounts. So we have two plates from the KBR kit. This one is going to go underneath and will be welded on up here. So I'm just going to cut off the two corners just so I can weld round the edge a bit better. And then the other ones can be bolted in from the top. The first thing I'm going to do is grind back all this sealer and paint, just because once we start welding that will go on fire, so we want that bare metal and then we can coat it afterwards. super happy there's no signs of rust or cracks on the mounts. All super clean. Now we're going to move on to welding some of the holes in the boot floor, and then we'll go into the arch and weld up this little hole here. Now these holes are meant to have a little screw coming out to mount the heat shield and the bumper, so we're going to have to fabricate little pieces. Back end is pretty much finished. Right now I'm going to begin to tackle the couple of holes on the passenger side of the floor, and then we'll get into doing the front sill where there's a hole underneath, and then the mount for the front wing. This here gives you a good idea of how the zinc weld-through primer works. You can still see the coating on this side where I sprayed, and obviously I didn't have any on this side, but you can see that it's burnt off the weld. So that's why it's important after the welding is to get in with the cavity wax, if it's somewhere inaccessible, or primer ideally, and just to coat that, otherwise it will rust from the inside out. So I'm quickly just going to dress up these welds. Obviously it's going to be hidden underneath the sound deadening and the carpet. We'll just tie them up and take the top of the weld off. Now I know that people have a couple of different ways of removing the sound deadening. A lot of people use dry ice or wire wheel, which is extremely messy. Dry ice isn't easily available where I am at the minute, so I found this other method that seems to be working really well. I don't know, is it because of the age of the sound deadening, but it's just chipping off nice and easy. There you go. So all of the sound deadening is now removed, and as you can see, it's quite the mess. So there's a perfect example of why you want to remove these bungs. Gather lots of rust underneath, all underneath the sealer. So now we'll just keep moving forward and begin to repair the front jacking point and the wing mounts. let's get this section ground back and we'll cut out this section here and fabricate a new piece. So let's cut out what we can see. This corner piece is rotten, so we're going to cut out a section. These holes under the carpet are actually from the manufacturing process, so they're not needed. So I'm just actually going to weld in the plate completely instead of having a bonded section, which can potentially cause rust. I'm just going to weld it up completely. That's all welded. I'm just going to check for pinholes. It's quite often you'll miss something, so let's see. 2, 3. So tack them up quickly. So I just decided to have a look at this lower arch. I noticed a bit of surface rust and went grinding a little bit, and obviously where the spot weld was, it's rusted through from the inside out. Cut out this section and put in a new piece. Before I do any more with the arches, I've just put epoxy on the pockets, just because when I cut the bottom of the sill out, I want to move the mount onto here to get access. So just epoxy these first, just so we can do that. To do the next part of the sill, I need to move this arm. So what I plan to do is just move it onto the rear trading arm mount, and then that will give access to the lower of the jacking point, and we can weld in a new plate. I'm going to lower the lift down and put a block of wood probably on the floor, just to be able to take the pressure off this. So I've done that, but it's still very tight, particularly here, just to get any tools in to cut out the rest of that lower sill. So I'm going to think about doing something else maybe. So what I've done for the jacking point, just to get access to the lower sill, is use these mounts that I made for the Mercedes restoration. If you haven't seen that video, go check it out. It's a couple of videos back, 700 hours of restoration. These don't obviously slide in because in the BMW jacking points they have two little notches to stop the jack from rotating. So I've taken it and ground in the two notches, and that's going to slide perfectly in there now. Now I can use this as the mount for the lift arm instead of underneath. And just as a safety precaution, I have my steel bar here. That's going to sit, we're going to put two in either side. And then this plate is going to bolt underneath, and that's just going to prevent any movement in that mount. Just moved on to the other side floor, and I've just began to remove the sound deadening, and this is exactly why it's important to remove it all. So as you can see, the sound deadening is all good and dry, but once we remove it, there's moisture underneath. So this is where I had started welding about 5 years ago, 6 years ago. Now obviously I'd use zinc primer on the inside, but you can see obviously the surface rust is coming through. Now at the time I'd only used zinc primer, I'd never filled the arches with cavity wax or anything, so it just shows the importance ideally to get in with epoxy primer and then a cavity wax, and that will just prevent the likes of this rust coming from the inside out. So that's the back inner section of the sill done. Now before I go cutting out the rest of the sill, I want to address the front corner here. So obviously there's a bit of work to do on the jacking point and on the inner section, obviously up in here. The rust in this hole here actually travels up a bit higher than what we can see. So I think what I'm going to have to do is cut out a section of this support panel, repair the rust behind, and then weld that panel back into place. As you can see there, the rust travels up a little bit higher than I'd hoped, but we can still fix that. Now this, because it's the jacking point, it has to be structurally strong. In this area alone, there's 6 layers of metal we're going to have to fabricate. So we have this first outer piece of the sill, and then we move on to the jacking point. So that's 3, and we have this support brace off the jacking point, which is 4. Panel here, which holds the wing. And then we have the floor, and that floor actually comes in and up behind this panel. And obviously a bit more here on the floor. So this one's going to take a little bit of time, but we'll get there. So I don't think you can actually buy a 3-door sill. So a common thing to use is the 5-door sills. They are very slightly different. 90% of it is the same until we get to the front section here, which is extended by a couple of inches. So what we're going to have to do, I've lined up the holes already with the jacking points there. And what we'll do is we'll trim down and shorten this, take out a section here, and then we can put the whole sill into place. So that is 4 sections of the jacking point finished. Before we move on to this inner brace here, we're going to have to cut the end of the new sill just to get it lined up and we can see where it's going to be placed, because this inner piece is spot welded to the outer sill. So just to get it lined up and measured, and then we can fabricate this new inner piece. These come formed and we're going to have to cut it and obviously weld along these lines. But what we're going to do is cut down here, and then whenever we shorten it, we're just going to weld the seam. We're just going to use this corner for now just to get that inner structure finished. So that's the front corner of the sill now tacked into place. Obviously afterwards we're going to bend the tab for the lower wing mounts, but I won't do that until the complete sill is in. So now that this is in place, I'm going to move down to the back section. And before we move the arm out of the way, I just going to cut out around the jacking point and just tidy up any areas here. And then we'll move the arm and then we can replace the full sill. That is most of the jacking point finished. Once I remove the rest of the sill, I'll just finish welding just on the inside edge here. Now that's 3mm angle iron, which is going to be much stronger than the original 1mm steel. So although it's not the prettiest, it'll be more than sufficient to jack up on. So now we can cut out the rest of the sill and begin to start preparing the new sill to be welded in. To remove this back section of the sill, we're going to have to move the lift arm, same as what we've done on the other side, and put it in place on the rear trailing arm mount. So we'll grind back the sealer and just cut these couple of tack welds that I'd done previously, and then the sill should be loose. What I'm going to do first is from the inside, we'll clean back this area and we'll drill out the spot welds that attach the sill, and then the last few we can get from underneath, and then we can cut the sill just along this, under the swage line, as that'll keep a bit of strength in the panel when we're welding. I want to drill most of them from the top, because when we put the sill back in place, then it means we can plug weld them easily from above. Section here on the sill that I want to cut out. Let's cut a small square, so we want to keep this in the new panel. So we're just going to mark roughly where we want to keep, and I've just used 2 hammers in the jacking points just to get the sill lined up. And see, it's nearly perfect at the back corner here. Obviously we come to the front, we're going to have to cut off down here. So initially we'll cut a wee bit wider just to allow a bit of room. We'll go from there. The sill is 90% trimmed down. Now, there's 1 or 2 places we're going to have to just grind down a touch just to make it fit perfectly for welding. The likes of here, this section is going to have to come down just a little bit to make a gap wider. And then on the front here, we're getting very close to this inner edge, so we'll slowly take off a piece at a time. So these sills come with a galvanized coating, so to weld we're going to have to remove the places where we'll be welding and use the zinc primer instead. So now we're just going to tack the front section into place. That is the sill prepped now to go in. We do have a couple of little spots that we just have to dress up and remove the surface rust, and then we can get the sill lined up and weld it in. So the sill is tacked on now. I'm just going to go up here and pull up this bit of a lip and we'll get it flush. And then what I'm going to do is use the jack and this little bit of timber just to push up on the bottom of the sill so we can get the spot welds done. Now that the sill is welded in on the top at least, I've just noticed along the length of it, it dips slightly. When you get a straight edge, there's a slight gap there in the middle. So what I have is a flat chisel from an air hammer, and I'm just going to use the jack to get up underneath that edge and help push it up slightly. Now, you have to be super careful because if you push too much, it could obviously lift the car off the ramp arms. Now, one thing I have to do is obviously drill the holes for the side skirt. This now is the last piece of the sill to go in. Now it does have a bit of surface rust, so what I'm going to do is throw it in the sandblaster, clean it up, and then weld it back in. I hadn't touched the car in about 3 days, and I just came back to the last little piece of the sill, and this just shows how bad the Irish climate is. This section has been sitting, I think 3 days, maybe 4 days, and you can see how much is already flash rusted. So we'll get it cleaned up and welded in, and that's the sill done. So I know a lot of people tend to struggle with overhead welding. Now, a little tip I can give is just increase your gas pressure by about 10%. So going from about 10 litres per minute up to about 12 litres per minute just helps, because the gas is actually heavier than the air, so when it comes out it tends to fall off a bit. So if you have a bit more pressure, it'll just help protect the weld a bit better. And then also increasing your wire speed by the same, about 10-20%, it'll just help penetrate the weld better. So that is the sill completely done on this side. So what I'm going to do is hoover out the inside of the car mix up some epoxy paint and just touch up the raw metal inside the car, and then I'm going to spray the inside of the sill with the epoxy using the long nozzle. That was one of the major welding jobs to do, and it's finally done. The next big job is to do the arches. Now, as I said in the last video, I want to avoid fiberglass arches, but I do want to do a wide body. And I wasn't sure if I was going to be able to do it because obviously there's quite a number of swage lines and areas to work around, like the petrol flap, and just being able to fabricate it, I wasn't too sure if it was possible, particularly with the upper swage line, if I could get the shape right on just using a flat piece of sheet steel. I was worried that if I use a bead roller on it that I could get the correct shape, but I just found this piece that I cut out from the sill. It's actually a very similar shape to the swage line on the car, so I just bent it, and it actually bent exactly how I wanted it to for the body. That's helped convince me that it is actually probably going to be possible. Look, sure, we can just try it and see how it works out, but I think first what we're going to have to do is get the suspension or the subframe at least put back into place and get the wheels on it and just see roughly where I want the arch to sit, because obviously with the wider wheels it's going to stick out a bit more, and we want to tuck the arches slightly so the wheels don't rub on the arches. So it's going to take a bit of trial and error and trying to get the sides to be equal, so I might, if possible, make up a wireframe that I can use to compare the two sides, and hopefully get those arches fabricated and welded in. I didn't have any bottles that fit the cavity wax gun, but that's what I'm going to do, is just use my epoxy in the cup, and we're just going to use this to get inside all of the sill and get a nice coating of epoxy along it. I've just taped up all the holes just to prevent, or just to try and reduce the overspray. The epoxy primer is very thick, so for it to go through that spray nozzle effectively, it has to be reduced by 30 to 50%, which means it requires 2 coats really inside to get the coverage. So as you can see, it's dripping out from all the seams, and that's important because you have your spot welds, and although they've been sprayed with the zinc primer, you'll always get a slight area around that will be left with bare metal. And just to give you an idea how effective it is, I'll take off some tape here. That just shows how much of a coating is in on the back of the sill. Yeah. And for anyone who's done restorations or works in their own car, they know that there's some days that you're going to struggle with motivation to come out, tackle these bigger jobs. What I can recommend is just come out, start something super simple, super easy, something like you can do in 10-15 minutes, whether it's cleaning the garage or a minor little job on a car, and you'll soon find, once you're in the flow of things, a couple of hours will have passed and you've done half a day's work. And I was hoping to have the underside pretty much completely all stone chip protected and painted by this stage, but it's just the way restorations go, they always take longer than expected. So I'm hoping now in the next video we'll get the arches done and potentially get all the underside completely resprayed and refreshed. So this is a bit of bonus content, again expressing how good the JENOLITE products are. Now this is my Audi, and I had a headlight wrap on it, which I've just removed, and the glue residue it has left is extremely stubborn. You know, I've been soaking this with a slow degreaser for a couple of minutes, and normally the slow degreaser is very good at removing glue residue, but this is much more difficult. As you can see, it just hardly wants to budge. So what we're going to try is JENOLITE's sister company GOGLEAN, their sticky stuff remover. This is the first time for me to use this product. Okay, it's been about 20 seconds. Let's see. Already much more effective than the slow degreaser. So we'll spray it again, let it sit for another minute and see how it goes. There you go, pretty much all gone. So yet again, another product that has impressed me from the JENOLITE and GOGLEAN range. And right now they're giving you a 15% discount across both websites. So I'll leave the links in the description, so check them out. We came out tonight with Simran and Chandler just to get a few roller shots of the Mazda. Chandler's going to get his resprayed now next month, and we'll get a couple shots of those. But
fucking nice me out of that, I'll tell you that.
So in the next video I'm going to finish the last couple of rust repairs just around like the boot seal, and then I'm going to move on to the big job of trying to fabricate the wide body kit. So that's going to be an interesting one to see if it works out or not, but we'll give it a go. And as always, every like, comment and subscription really helps the channel grow, so do that down below. Until next time.